Abraham Lincoln, 10 surprising facts you've probably never heard before. When you think of Abraham Lincoln, you probably picture the tall man in a black hat, the great emancipator, the president who saved the Union. But behind the beard and the history books, Lincoln was far more fascinating and far more human than most of us realize. Today, we're uncovering 10 surprising facts about Abraham Lincoln that you probably never heard before. Some are strange, some are funny, and some might completely change how you see him. Let's get started. 1. Lincoln was a licensed bartender before Abraham Lincoln ever became the 16th President of the United States, before the Civil War, and before the speeches that changed American history forever. He had a very unexpected job. Lincoln was once a licensed bartender. Yes, Abraham Lincoln, serving drinks. In the early 1830s, Lincoln was living in a small frontier town called New Salem, Illinois. Life there was simple, and the town wasn't full of fancy restaurants or coffee shops. Instead, people gathered in general stores and taverns to talk, trade, and hear the latest news. In 1833, Lincoln and a business partner opened a general store that sold basic supplies like flour, tools, and clothing. But it wasn't just a store. It also served alcohol, which made it a popular place for locals to gather. And here's the surprising part. Lincoln actually received an official license that allowed him to legally sell alcohol. So at one point in his life, the man who would later be remembered as one of America's greatest leaders was literally behind the counter, pouring whiskey for farmers and travelers. What makes this even more ironic is that later in life, Lincoln gave speeches warning about the dangers of alcohol and supported the temperance movement. So he went from selling drinks to speaking against them. Now that is a career transformation. 2. He was an incredible wrestler. When people think of Abraham Lincoln, they usually imagine a calm, serious leader delivering speeches and making history. But what most people don't realize is that Lincoln wasn't just smart. He was also physically intimidating. Lincoln stood about 6 feet 4 inches tall, which was extremely rare in the 1800s. Most men back then were much shorter, so Lincoln naturally stood out in any crowd. But it wasn't just his height that made him impressive. He was known for being incredibly strong and surprisingly athletic. As a young man living in Illinois, Lincoln became famous for wrestling, and back then, wrestling wasn't some organized sport with referees and rules like today. It was rough, competitive, and sometimes even brutal. Men would wrestle in front of crowds as a way to prove toughness and earn respect. According to stories from people who knew him, Lincoln competed in around 300 wrestling matches and lost only one. That's an insane record. There's even a famous story about Lincoln wrestling a local bully from a group called the Clary's Grove Boys. The bully expected to embarrass Lincoln, but Lincoln fought back so well that the crowd ended up cheering for him instead. His reputation became so legendary that many years later, Lincoln was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. So yes, America's greatest president might also have been one of its toughest fighters. He created the Secret Service. Here's a chilling coincidence. On the very day Lincoln was assassinated, April 14, 1865, he signed legislation creating the United States Secret Service. However, it wasn't created to protect the president at first. Its original purpose was to combat counterfeit currency, which was a massive problem at the time. It wasn't until years later, after more presidential assassinations, that the Secret Service began protecting the president. History can be haunting sometimes. 4. Lincoln had a patent. Lincoln is the only U.S. president to ever hold a patent. In 1849, he patented a device designed to lift boats over shoals and obstacles in rivers. The invention involved inflatable buoyant chambers attached to boats. While the invention was never manufactured, it shows something remarkable. Lincoln was not just a politician. He was an innovator. He believed deeply in technology and progress. That curiosity stayed with him throughout his life. 5. He suffered from severe depression. Lincoln's sense of humor was famous. He told stories constantly and loved making people laugh. But behind that humor was deep sadness. Throughout his life, Lincoln struggled with what historians believe was severe clinical depression. He experienced multiple periods of intense grief, especially after the death of loved ones. Friends worried about his mental health at times, yet despite this, he led the nation through its darkest hour, the Civil War. His resilience in the face of personal pain makes his leadership even more powerful. 6. He didn't grow a beard until a little girl suggested it. Lincoln didn't always have his iconic beard. During his 1860 presidential campaign, an 11-year-old girl named Grace Bedell wrote him a letter suggesting he grow a beard. She thought it would make him look more distinguished and help him win votes. Lincoln responded kindly and decided to take her advice. Soon after, he grew the beard that would become one of the most recognizable looks in American history. Sometimes history changes because of an 11-year-old's suggestion. 7. He was a licensed lawyer. Without going to law school, Lincoln had very little formal education, less than 1 year in total. He was mostly self-taught. He borrowed books, studied constantly, and educated himself. When he decided to become a lawyer, he didn't attend law school. Instead, he studied independently and passed the bar examination in 1836. From a log cabin to the courtroom to the White House, all built on self-discipline and determination. 8. Lincoln was a cat lover. While many presidents owned pets, Lincoln had a special affection for cats. He once said that one of his cats was smarter than his entire cabinet. During the Civil War, when his wife thought the White House was too chaotic for pets, Lincoln reportedly fed stray cats at the dinner table. Even during war, he had a soft spot for animals. 9. He held seances in the White House. After the tragic death of his 11-year-old son, Willie, in 1862, Mary Todd Lincoln became deeply involved in spiritualism. She held seances in the White House, hoping to communicate with her son. Lincoln attended at least a few of these sessions. Whether he believed in them or simply supported his grieving wife is debated by historians. But yes, seances were held in the White House during the Civil War. History is often stranger than fiction. 10. He dreamed of his own assassination, perhaps the most eerie fact of all. Shortly before his assassination, Lincoln reportedly told friends about a disturbing dream. In the dream, he walked through the White House and found people mourning. When he asked who had died, someone replied, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." Just days later, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Whether coincidence or something more mysterious, the story still sends chills down the spine. Abraham Lincoln wasn't just the man on the $5 bill. He was a wrestler, a bartender, an inventor, a self-taught lawyer, a grieving father, a leader battling depression, a man shaped by hardship and humanity. The more we learn about him, the more real he becomes. Which of these facts surprised you the most?